Hello out there. My name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and this is Book Club. So welcome. Each month we discuss a book. This month it is Printing by Hand. And I give kind of a look through the book and my take on it. And I hope that you'll add your comments in terms of what you thought of the book too. So basically, we should just jump in and get started, right? Oh, I'm going to say the following, which is I bought this book a long time ago. I'm thinking maybe even when I lived in New York, I'm not sure. So that was many, many years ago. And I didn't read it. I bought it because it was so cute because the pictures like on the back of the book were so cute and I wanted to do it. And now having read it, I think I'm a little advanced for where the book is. It's a great book for beginners, but enough talking. Let's just jump in and look at it here. So let me just figure out how to make this screen the big one. There we go. Okay, so one of the first things that I love about this book, which I wish a lot of how-to books were done this way, is that it's spiral bound. Right? It has a spiral binding inside. So that means you really can put the book down on a table and it's super easy to flip through and see exactly what you're doing here, right? So again, the photography in here is beautiful and all the projects are beautiful too. I really, really like them. So I highlighted a couple things in here that at least I thought were interesting. One of them, which I think is really important, is the author says here, I've always found these imperfections charming and have enjoyed how clearly they herald the touch of the human hand. So the whole aesthetic of this book, which is an aesthetic I really like, is all about things being really handmade, which is really important. So another thing I thought was really interesting is she says that the idea for a project usually starts with a surface on which she wants to print, which is the opposite of how I work. When I create things like this giant stamp, I think more of the design that I want to do, and then I kind of find a surface that it will fit on. She definitely, and the approach in this book is much more about like, oh, I want to print on a wall. What am I going to put on there? One of the things that I like a lot that I thought I would point out is there are a lot of charts in this book that can be very helpful. This one is the same stamp on smooth paper, smooth fabric, wood, sheetrock, textured fabric, textured paper. So same stamp, same ink, and you can see how the results are so different. And I thought this was sort of a great way of how this book is actually laid out, which is so much in the book is really the author, taking you through sort of her very scientific, I guess you could say, approach to how it's going to go. So as we flip through, she does talk a lot about developing a collection of things. I do like some of her tips about patterning as well. So here you can see there's a side repeat and a drop repeat. And she also shows how to create a continuous stamp where the pattern continues. She talks about random repeats. So this one is more regular, even spacing, and this one is more random and kind of what the difference is that makes. So there's a lot of, I think, like good information. Choosing a printing method. She goes through, I do not have the patience for this kind of thing, but I'm glad that there are people out there who do. If you want to print here on this, like what's the best surface? And you can kind of figure out which method you might want to use. So again, a nice resource. She did also talk about like some color mixing stuff. And then I have been working on some little color mixing charts. So one of the things I've been doing is seeing like, if I take one color, how many different colors can I get out of it just by mixing one more color with it, right? So if I just have like this green, did you know that you can get purple? Did you know that you can get purple from mixing it right with this green? And just so that's always kind of a fun thing. I'm a huge fan of color mixing. I think not enough people really experiment with how many different tints, tones, and shades they can get from just some really simple ideas. Like for instance, this is the original color. This is just adding white, and adding white. And that really does look like 4 different colors of paint. So there's a lot you can do with not a lot. And she has some formulas in here that she likes to use, which can be useful to you, again, if you're a beginner. So stamping. I am definitely a huge fan of stamping. In fact, I quite literally wrote the book on it. In fact, I saw this week that my book, Carve Stamp Play, I think it was on Amazon for like $6 or something like that. So if you're interested in checking out my book on stamping and stamp carving, it's called Carve, Stamp, Play. And again, it's only like $6 on Amazon right now. So lots of great tips in here about stamping on fabric, on paper. Again, her projects are beautiful, lots of different stuff. So this is an example of the first project. She does a lot with very little in here, which I think is great. And I thought what I would show you really quickly is just a couple of the stamps. I didn't carve anything new after reading this because there wasn't really any new to me information in here, but I wanted to show a couple of things I've done with stamps. And you can see a beautiful tablecloth done with stamping here, you know, which I think lines up very much with some of the work that she's done. So before we get to the stenciling, here is some fabric, which you can see I stamped for this all over pattern, which I think looks really great. And I have this, there's a thing I do every October called Print Inktober. And so one year I did only on fabric printing, and I did this. This is also stamping on fabric. This time I used block printing ink onto dark fabric with a very simple block. Again, a lot of impact there, you know, in the fabric. And I love having all of this custom fabric. One of the things that you can do is she teaches you how to do what is basically a two-sided repeat. So that is a stamp like you can see here, where it seems like it's a continuous ribbon, even though the stamp is actually quite small. So this print was made with that stamp, and this continuous leaf print was made with that stamp, and it ends up looking continuous because of how you know, line it up. So that sort of makes it make the most sense. So Ellen has a question, and she says, thank you for saying my book is great. Do I think this book is worth having if you already have your book? So this book is not purely about stamping and stamp carving. My book is a very, very in-depth look at stamping and stamp carving. This book really covers also screen printing and stenciling. So it really depends if you're interested in those other things. So I hope that that helps, Ellen. Okay, so let's go back to this. I wanted to show you something that I like to do, which is you can also do a four-sided repeat, and these turn out really cool. So let's just take some stamping ink and a tag, and let me lower the camera a little bit so that you can get nice and close to it. And really see what's going on. So I'm going to be using Versaclear ink, which is a pigment ink. I don't normally use a lot of pigment ink, but I've been into it lately. But I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm just going to ink up my stamp. And I do press the ink pad to the stamp. And like I said, this is a four-sided repeating stamp, meaning it should repeat on all four sides. So you'll notice I have an arrow on the back. That's something I always do with my stamps. Now I'm pressing it directly to the pad, and I sometimes alternate between pressing the pad to it and it to the pad, especially depending on the size of the stamp. This is small enough, so you can see how seamless that already looks. But the arrow on the back is really one of the things that I found keeps me honest, so to speak, so that I really am sure that I have the stamp in the correct orientation in order to get that repeat that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead again and stamp that there. And you can see we're coming along with our pattern. And one of the things that the author talks about in the book, which I happen to agree with too, is that when you do any of these techniques, you get kind of varied results, right? Some prints are perfect, some are imperfect, and that's kind of the beauty of it because it's handmade. And I think the goal should always be for it to look handmade. I know people think it's a compliment when they say things to you like, oh, wow, that looks like you could sell it, or that looks like it could be in a store or whatever. But I always think like, that's great. And I'm glad that people think that. A, selling things is not the like highest compliment. It shouldn't be. But B, also, I think that there is something really wonderful about things that look like they were made by a person. So my Band-Aid is getting very dirty and dragged through everything. So it's leaving little extra marks. but it's really fun to be able to create quite a, you know, big pattern with what is essentially a tiny scrap of rubber. Now, I know there are a lot of people who are not interested in carving rubber. It can be expensive, or it can be something you're not interested in, but you can 100% and totally do foam stamps like this big bad boy that you see here. Let me move this out of the way. I guess I should show you my seamless pattern once more. Pretty cool, right? Or these little guys here, and these are just foam. And that is another technique that she goes over in the book, although she uses plexi. I use a thick piece of foam on the bottom of my stamps here and a thin piece of foam for the design. And she uses a piece of plexiglass so she can see through it, which I've done. I personally don't like it as much, but again, that's all personal preference. Okay, so let's get back into the book. And I think also will partially answer Ellen's question about, like, is this book worth getting? I personally think the book is beautiful, but I don't think I would have bought it again. So stenciling. She talks about all sorts of different materials that you can cut your stencils out of. One of the important things she talks about is bridges. And if you're not familiar with stencil bridges, this is an R without a bridge. This is an R with the bridge so that you get the inside of the R. Okay. I love this example where she stenciled a wall. I think this is beautiful. I'd love to do that in my own house. She also talks about different methods of stenciling and freezer paper stencils and all sorts of fun stuff. And again, her projects are amazing. There's one project in particular that has me just in absolute love. So she uses contact paper as stencils here. And then this is how the dresser looks at the end. Isn't that amazing? I love that. I think it's so beautiful. So I did do some stenciling. You may or may not know that I designed stencils for the Crafters Workshop. And I've been doing that since 2011. So almost a decade, I guess. But here is some fabric that I stenciled using freezer paper stencils. Basically, where you see the white is what I cut out of freezer paper. You basically just iron it on. There's a waxy side. You iron the waxy side on, stencil around it. And now I used obviously hot pink to do it. And now I have this great fabric. You can also, I like to do sort of found stencils of all kinds. So for instance, if you have like a die cut or anything like that, like this can be a stencil. But there are a lot of different fun ways to stencil. And actually, if you're interested in learning more about stenciling, I do have a free class all about stenciling called Stencil 101. And you can find it at balzerdesigns.com. And there's lots of good tips there about stenciling of all kinds, how to keep your ink from rolling under, all that kind of stuff. But again, her projects are fabulous. This paperless wallpaper, I want her to come to my house. What I really want to know, because I couldn't figure it out even from reading instructions, is see how this part of the tree, this is where it looks like wallpaper, because it kind of goes behind the door and here too. How did she get the stencil so close to the door frame, you know, bending it up and so that there isn't any bleeding like that? I just don't know. It's amazing how she did that. So I think that's the part that sort of excites me the most about it. But she has lots of beautiful, delicate stuff. Now, screen printing is something, if you've never tried, you should definitely do it. It's lots of fun, really interesting to do. And there's some really good basic instructions in here. Now, she uses a lot of pre-made screens, which are great. And I have used many of those. Here's an example. I made this screen a couple years ago. This is just from a Blick screen. And I used a combination of screen drawing fluid and screen filler to create the design. And all you simply do is you take a squeegee. You can also use a credit card, and you put the ink on and you scrape it through, and you can do tons of t-shirts or fabric or whatever else you want in sort of a repetitive way. You can also do images that are very distressed. So for instance, this is a screen that I made myself. This was a frame which had canvas on it. So it was like a canvas that you buy at Michael's or something like that. And I just ripped off the canvas. So I had the frame and I stretched, this is a curtain shear over it. And then again, I used the same drawing fluid and screen filler to create this design, which is a series of kind of distressed circles. And this is what it looks like when you screen print it. So, you know, you can do sort of any design you want screen printed. One of the things that she suggests in here, which is lots of fun, is to use paper stencils. So let's see, I have some examples. Actually, this is not paper stencils. This was screen printed with Thermofax screens, which are these really cool flat screens that are just, you take any photo or image and you put it in and it burns holes into the screen. And that's how you can see sort of these bats on here. But this was done, I took an embroidery hoop and made a little screen. And then I cut this face from paper, just a paper stencil. And you can see now I have this fabric that's covered in ladies looking at you. And this is a method that she teaches in the book, not the embroidery hoop part, but definitely the paper stencil part. One thing I did take out of her book was right here, this chart, where she shows you sort of how to do a repeat in screen printing. So I left the lines in here. I don't know if you can see them. So I have a repeat pattern on here, right? She talks about how to space it. Can you see the kind of light green line? I drew a grid on my fabric with a water-soluble marker. And then I lined my screen up and I printed this one, this one, this one, and this one, and then let them dry and then came back, right, and did the others so that the screens wouldn't sort of touch each other in order to get my repeating pattern. So I think it's nice that she goes over some of those tips. The other thing that's really useful is this troubleshooting chart. Because she talks about like if part of the image isn't printing, if the print is bleeding around the edges, if the print has a shadow, like all the different things that you can do when those happen. So for instance, I have a big pile of deli paper where I did some experimenting with different things. So I was doing, so this is the black ink is screen printed just on top of a piece of deli paper that was painted. You can see the nice crisp edges you get from cutting out paper. This is another paper screen to do these asterisks. One of the great things about screen printing is it's a very easy way to get tons and tons and tons of the same image kind of over and over and over again. Here you go. I did this big screen multiple times. Just playing around again, that same design with lots of little pieces. And I just cut everything out with a craft knife. Here's the reverse, basically, right? I took the parts that were left over that I cut out of here with a knife to do this opposite. I do like it on these kinds of pinks. I think this is, I can't wait to use this as a piece of collage paper. All those little, look at the nice crisp edges on that. I do like that. I ran into a couple problems, which you always do when I changed inks. So I experimented with that. Oh, here's my favorite example of running into a problem. By the way, this is my test print for the design that I ended up putting on the fabric. This was just a paper stencil that I cut and screen printed with. So I did, I did this notebook, screen printed this notebook, loved how it turned out. So I decided to do the back. So I did the back of it. Let me just cover this part up for 1 second. I did the back of it with the screen. It looked great. I took it over to my drying rack and then I dropped it. And it hit the floor right here. So now I have this huge smudge from where it hit the floor. And I've decided to accept it and to live with it. But I can tell you, I was mad at myself when it happened. So that was really annoying. Ellen, I saw your question about was my fabric painted or dyed. I'm not sure which color fabric you're talking about, but almost all of this, I don't think any of the fabric I showed was dyed. So FYI. And Kathy says, I would love some of your older, smaller stencil. I have some of your cat ones. So if you're talking about the little Balzer bits, a little tip from me to you is that if you tell me which ones you're looking for and you have access to an electronic cutter, I can release an SVG file of any of the ones that are discontinued because I think they're all discontinued and it's kind of the only way to get them now. So I'm happy to do that if you send me a note about it. Okay, the pink one is definitely paint. It's not dye. Remember this, dye is always going to seep under. It's always going to seep under. The only way to block dye would be with wax. That's what batik is. So you absolutely cannot, I'll say that again, freezer paper stencils, you're never going to get a crisp line with dye. Paint is the only way to get a crisp line. So this is fabric paint so that the hand of the fabric still feels like fabric. But if you use acrylic, if you're not going to do anything with it. But yeah, dye will always creep through your fabric. So important to know. Okay, so let's talk about the book a little bit more. Let me put the other camera on up so that you can see that. So I really like her troubleshooting guides. Again, her projects are fabulous. She has a little modern baby quilt in here, which is super cute. It's tied. Look at this dog bed. How cute is that? Screen printed dog bed. I love that. And there's lots of nice, helpful things in here, you know, depending on what you're looking for. But I think this is a very great beginner book. It's very clear. It gives you a wide variety of options. The projects are super fun. I put the tab in here because this is the repeat idea. This is a very good chart where she basically shows you how to measure your screen for a repeat that overlaps and how you can kind of work that out. So I think that's really helpful. And you know, again, like, I think the projects are super cool. They're not like your basic projects you find everywhere. I'd love to, you know, reupholster a chair and all sorts of stuff. The other really nice thing is there's an envelope in the back and it contains all the patterns that she uses in the book. So you don't have to think of your own patterns when you're practicing the skills. She has them for you in the back. So I think that's a really nice idea too. Overall, my sort of thoughts about the book are: love the spiral binding. It's beautiful. The projects are inspiring. I think all the instructions are good. There's nothing that I disagree with or have a problem with. I think the charts are extremely helpful. It is definitely a beginner's book, which I think is great. And we always need lots of beginner's books. So if you're a beginner and you're interested in stamping or stenciling or silk screening, there are a lot of different options here for you. So I don't know if anybody else has read this book or checked it out, but that's kind of my feeling about it. I definitely would not buy it now, sort of where I am at my, you know, level of knowledge, but you could still do it. I do want to mention that I am teaching 2 live online classes coming up, one on August 14th and one on September 12th. The September 12th one is on screen printing. It's how to set up like screen printing at home and how to screen print at home. So that might be useful. And then the August 14th one is a mixed media collage class that's kind of focused on design. So if you're interested in that, you can check all that out at juliebalzer.com/live-online-classes.html. And I noticed that Ellen says this may be good for the screen printing part, as I look at several screens sitting here in my studio that I haven't been using forever. Last time I used real screen printing was in high school. Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people. You know, there are lots of things that we do that we just haven't done in a long time. I also want to mention that my class sketchbook habit, keeping a visual diary, is starting soon, and there's a 15% off code that's good until July 10th. So you've got a couple more days to get in on that if you're interested in learning about how to keep a sketchbook, a visual diary, or something like that. Okay, so the last thing I just really want to say about this book, I do think of books as classes, and I think we all should think of books as classes, because if you paid for a class, you would show up to class, right? But if you pay for a book, you don't always show up and like read the book. And I have found with almost all of these books, because I am so guilty of this. So the reason I'm telling you this is not because I'm preaching at you. It's because I'm trying to tell myself to do it, which is stop just buying the books. You got to actually read the books and consume them and treat them as a class. Take notes, write in them, do the projects, you know, all that kind of stuff. Because that's the other thing, which is I think it makes a big difference if you've ever taken an online class and just watched the videos instead of actually doing the exercises, and you think you get it just because you watch the video. But I have always found for me that I don't actually get it. I don't actually get it until I do it. And so I think it's really important to do what you can, you know, with it. Okay, so that's sort of my PSA, my soapbox speech about how you should sort of think about, treat books, all that kind of stuff. And I do think, like, I audit books, so to speak. I take them up from the library and I see if I like them or not, if I like them enough to add them to my collection. So it's the same as auditing a class. Like, do you really want to commit? I think that's totally up to you. So the next book that we're going to read, I'm going to go a little cerebral, which is we're actually going to read a book that is some writings from Matisse. It's called Matisse on Art. And I think did I have the name correct? Let's just see if I do. So the next book club is on August 11th, and yeah, Matisse on Art. So it's some of his writings that have been collected, where he talks about like writing art and he talks about writing art. He talks about, you know, art and sort of advice to young artists and all that kind of stuff. So I've just read the first few pages of it, but it looks promising and I'm excited to talk about it. And talk about some of the ideas. So when I say it's going to be cerebral, it's because there aren't any really projects to do in it, although I might find some because you never know. And I totally agree with Jill, who says, I have a tendency to skim craft books instead of reading. Me too. I look at the pretty pictures. Like I looked at this dresser picture and bought this book, and I never read this book again after that. It just went on my shelf because I thought, oh, well, by buying the book, it's like I'm doing it. It's kind of like if you buy the vegetables, it's like you ate them. It doesn't matter if they go bad in your fridge or whatever, right? So yeah, I'm definitely saying, let's do it. Let's go ahead and read it. So I want to thank all of you so much for spending half an hour with me going over this month's book. Again, like great book for beginners, pretty pictures, and I hope to see you next month. Thanks so much. Bye.